All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Nathan McKenzie. I'm a game designer and consultant working out of Madison. My presentation today is entitled Perils of Choice, the sometimes dire consequences of freedom in games. I'm really, really fascinated by choice, so hopefully this will be an interesting topic. In terms of my background, I have, in addition to my current status, I've been a commercial game designer. I worked on titles such as Soldier of Fortune, Quake 4, Heretic 2, and a number of other titles at various points. Right, so without further ado, I'm going to start out with a happy tale of the game Animal Crossing. Several months ago, my significant other, who was not a gamer, was taking a class on games and learning. And so she came to me and said, well, what should I play? And I, being the savvy game designer, said, I know exactly what you need. So I broke out Animal Crossing, which is a very sweet, very approachable game for people who aren't into extremely hardcore, violent, very fast reaction time games. Louder? Oh, sure. Absolutely. Right, okay. Just trying to interpret your sign language there. So I hooked her up with this game, Animal Crossing. And if you're not familiar with it, Animal Crossing is a game in which you move into this village populated by animals who walk around on their hind legs. And you immediately are given a house and then a mortgage that you have to pay off by a raccoon who runs a 7-Eleven. And as happens. So it's sort of like student loans. It gets sprung on you immediately. So the player immediately has this obligation. They have got a house, they've got a mortgage, and the game is very clever in the way that it introduces things to these new players. Basically, the raccoon will say, you owe me this money, you need to go do the following jobs for me. But in the process of doing these jobs, you're introduced to all the sorts of really fun, delightful, interesting things that you get to do in the world of Animal Crossing. It's good exposure. It's this rule that helps you understand how to play the game. So things were going along really well, and my significant other was enjoying the game and enjoying all the different things you can do, digging up money from rocks and collecting butterflies and running errands for crocodiles and whatnot. But as I was watching her play, I started thinking, being a gamer, of course, I started thinking, Animal Crossing, that's a pretty fun game. I better play it too. So I started Animal Crossing, and at first things were going okay. I had my town called Moscow. I was doing well, and I was doing all sorts of fun things. But the thing about those mortgages is that when you pay them off, you automatically purchase a bigger house where you can put more stuff. So it's a little model of a very very jolly form of capitalism there. And so I started getting excited about this idea of the bigger houses. That was kind of okay. That wouldn't have been a problem. But as I was poking around the town, I noticed that my ocean front had some fish in it, and the game has a fishing component. And I caught some fish, and I noticed that they were worth a lot of money. They were worth far more than everything else that I was doing when I was fooling around. Well, I want to pay off my mortgage. Here's these expensive fish. So suddenly my activity started sliding more in the direction of just fishing, more and more fishing. I wanted to pay off my mortgage. It was worth a lot of money. Well, it's not actually all that fun, the fishing. It's sort of boring. I'm just tossing this thing in the water over and over and over, running back and forth down the coast. And I started feeling like, okay, this is no good. I just spent an hour and a half doing this thing that, if you ask me, I don't enjoy it. I really want to pay off this mortgage. So I went back and I tried to do these other activities that the game provided for me, the things that make the game actually really good. But at this point, because of the money values involved and because I wanted to pay off my mortgage, the other activities started feeling a little shallow and a little empty. Like, well, yes, I delivered that shirt for the mongoose, but I got nothing for it, not compared to a fish. So I started binging, and I caught lots and lots of fish. And eventually, I paid off my mortgage, and then I quit Animal Crossing because I had left a bad taste in my mouth. Yes. Okay, so what's the point of the story? So what? Apparently, I don't play Animal Crossing in a way that I keep entertaining myself. Well, okay, that's one point. Sure, apparently I didn't play it in a good way. But I'm a game designer, and so while it's fun to talk about what a particular player does, what's more interesting to me is to think about the choices that these developers made when they made Animal Crossing. What were they thinking? Did they think that a player might do what I just did? Was that in their heads there? So this is a bigger topic to me, a much more interesting one, player choice. What does it mean to give players a choice, and what are the impacts of those choices? So a choice is adding something like the fishing. Is it a recipe for an interesting experience, or was that inclusion actually the opportunity, the freedom, by giving me that choice, was it the freedom to be bored, to be confused, or frustrated? Okay, so let's jump back a little bit. Why am I interested in games, aside from I've been paid to make them at points? Well, to me, and there's a lot of things interesting in games, obviously. It just takes wandering around this conference, listening to people like Jay or other people here to recognize there's a lot that can be said about games. But what's really interesting to me is that you can make people do things with games, and that's really interesting. If you were to watch somebody playing Dance Dance Revolution without actually seeing the machine, you would think they were having some sort of seizure, and you'd probably call for help. You'd think, this is not okay. But if you talk to somebody who's played it, and I've played it a lot, I like it a lot, they'll say, no, it's great. I really like standing there and twitching around and hopping around. That's a good time. Okay, so what's going on here? Like, somebody has built a system that can make people do this crazy thing. And I think you can extrapolate from that more generally. What games are about on some level is building systems that can get people to do stuff and have a good time doing it. Games manufacture consent, in a sense, except for when they don't. I think that if you were to go, again, ask the developers of Animal Crossing, so did you want a player to do this? Did you want them to get bored and not see most of your content? And they would surely say, no, that doesn't seem okay. That's not why we make games, to let people be bored. But that is what happened. Something went wrong there. The system of rules, the space they built, it didn't quite work for the way that I played the game. So games allow choice. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. I had that choice to play it that way. But what do we mean by that? So when we're talking about the inclusion of the fishing in Animal Crossing, choice, the choice to fish, for example, or even when as academics we're very excited that games allow choice, they allow the reader to become co-writer, so on and so forth. All these things are interesting ideas, but what does it mean? What does it mean to have choice or to have options? So is it having fishing or any other action or ducking or any particular moment on a controller you can do? Or is it the higher level interactions? Is it what happens once a player has been exposed to the world, has learned some things, has started setting some goals, and then what they do once they have those goals, once they see the constraints of the world, once they know what their choices are, what they can do? Which part is choice? Is it this lower level thing, you can duck or you can't, or is it this higher thing? Here are the sorts of things you seem to do once the game is in motion. So this is what my talk is about. I want to look at some things that people do that seem superficially to introduce choice, but actually introduce some problems, possibly, potentially. And then look at some other games that modulate choice in really kind of interesting, surprising ways that are, at least I hope, interesting to think about and to wonder about. So I'm going to talk about, right now, a game I made, Soldier of Fortune. And much like I think if you were to ask the Animal Crossing designers, so is this what you wanted? Did you want someone to do this thing? They would probably say, no, I don't know what happened there. That seems to be not okay. In Soldier of Fortune, one of the things we did, we were extremely violent, but otherwise fairly standard first-person shooter. One of the things that we did to make the game more interesting was prior to going into missions, we would let players select from any of the weapons they found in the game. We thought, here's an interesting choice. Instead of just having whatever weapons you found on the floor in the desert, what if you got to pick from these? That's an interesting choice. Feels like it could be. But what we found in practice, even though we never were able to fix this, was that some of the weapons were really odd, and some of them were very generic. And players knew how to use the generic ones. They came into the game knowing how to use the generic ones. And given the choice between something they didn't know how to use, something they did, they would always default to whatever was obvious. So basically, we provided players with the opportunity not to see our cool stuff. Or still, they were making choices about levels they have no knowledge about. So much like if I said to you, you're about to have a conversation with John who you've never met, what topics you're going to avoid? You might say, well, I don't know, religion and politics. But otherwise, who knows? You don't know John. The same thing. Making this choice didn't really feel like a choice at all. It just felt like some random thing that you clicked because who knows. So really what I'm getting at, I guess, is that choices can only be evaluated in context. They're kind of systemic things. It's all about what emerges from the system when it gets set in motion. So I'm going to look at some specific choices that have some problems. One of them, I think, and I want to preface this by saying every single choice that I'm about to mention, you can easily point to a bunch of really great games that it's present in, and that does seem to damn my argument a bit. But I still think it's worth at least exploring it a little bit. So I'm going to talk about choices with too far-reaching of consequences. Specifically, choices that have extremely significant impacts that are not really reversible. And hopefully this will be more clear in a second when I bring in for my examples. But basically, in games, a lot of fantasy games, it's not uncommon to pick a character class when you start out the game, and you don't actually, at that moment, have enough knowledge to even know what character classes are well suited to how you play. But that seems like an exciting choice, right? Like, I can map my identity into a warrior. Maybe that's what expresses me the most, being a warrior. Maybe, who knows? It really takes playing most of the game before you get to the point where you can even say, oh yeah, that didn't work for me. In the case of something like EverQuest, it could literally take you 8,000 hours before you find out that the character doesn't work at the end of the game. Another interesting thing about this, though, in terms of diminished play variety, is that in a certain way, something like EverQuest is sort of saying, here's 20 interesting things that you can do in the game. Pick one of them for the whole game. Well, that seems sort of shoddy. Maybe I want all 20. The 20 sounded good. Well, that's not really where the choice is being made. The choice is being made for the entirety of the game. Another example of this, and I feel like saying anything about Deus Ex is sort of like, I don't know, saying that Mother Teresa smells bad or looks funny. It's not a way to be popular, but in the cyberpunk first-person fill-in-the-blank shooter, stealth game, whatever, Deus Ex, they go out of their way to make sure that you can solve problems in all sorts of interesting ways. You want to be a sniper? That's great. You want to be a stealth character? That's great, too. You want to be a network hacker? That's really, really great. But you decide these things early, and you invest points in getting good at them. And what that means is that you get locked into whatever you're good at. If partway through the game you say, I'm very tired of network hacking. I thought in my head that it would feel very cool, but it turns out to be very boring. Okay, well, you can restart. That's a thing you can do. Otherwise, keep hacking networks, whether it's fun or not. And I've heard stories of people who have played this game and had extremely very different kinds of experiences based off of what in their head seemed like it would be cool to do. Deus Ex has all sorts of great qualities, of course, and even if I say it doesn't matter. People love it. But another thing, which kind of goes hand in hand with what I was just touching on, was situations where we provide players with choices where they can't possibly have enough information, often caused by having a dearth of feedback or being forced to choose things way too early. This isn't really necessarily a choice in any meaningful sense, and it can particularly make players feel cheated when they have to make decisions they can't possibly make meaningfully. And it can also result in a lot of conservative behavior if players aren't in safe spaces to make these choices and to try them out. You can just end up with people doing the bare minimum to make sure they don't get burned because they weren't able to make their decisions well. An example of this, in addition to Soldier of Fortune or picking your college when you're in high school, is the game Diablo 2, where basically when players go up levels, they get skill points. And the only way to know what new skills do is to put points in those skills. You're never allowed to actually take the points back out of those skills, however. So it's common knowledge in the online community that to understand how a class plays in Diablo 2, you have to play the game through one full time, put points in all those skills, and then start over because you've wasted those points in skills that you don't want. Diablo 2 is very fun, and I need only the barest minimum excuse to play it again. But that still seems like sort of a problem for players making what ought to be interesting choices.